Hello from New York, I'm Chris Hayes. At least 50 casualties are reported, some of them fatalities from the 7.2 earthquake in Turkey this morning. Here at home, we are talking about the political battle between President Obama and Republicans over jobs with writer James Polis, founder of the blog Postmodern Conservative, Mary Kay Henry, president of the Service Employees International Union, Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor at Slate.com, and joining us now, my buddy Richard Kim, executive editor of TheNation.com, occupying the seat vacated by Richard Blumenthal.
Hi, Chris.
How you doing?
Good. I just woke up about an hour ago. A little unprepared, so I'm just going to ask Siri if you stump me on anything, like what is the top marginal tax rate in the U.S. Siri, and she actually knows the answer.
All right. Well, we'll test that out.
You know, I can't believe no one has told me yet who Siri thinks is going to be the next president.
I actually asked Siri that.
And what's the answer?
She won't answer the question.
All right. Well, we're just going to have to wait until the election happens to find out. If you talk to Occupy Wall Street protesters, they will insist their cause is not about left versus right, but up versus down. That said, so far, it's mostly been those on the left embracing the protests and those on the right ridiculing them. I'm joined now by an exception to that rule. Joining us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is a Republican presidential candidate who supports Occupy Wall Street, former Louisiana Governor Buddy Roemer. Good morning, Governor. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm proud to be here, man.
It's great to see you. The reason that we wanted to have you on, I've seen your comments in support of Occupy Wall Street. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about the Republican field. It occurs to me that you were a governor of Louisiana. You served in the United States Congress. You started a community bank. Gary Johnson, who is another candidate in the Republican field, was a two-term, very popular governor in New Mexico. I think he went out with a 65% approval rating, something like that. Very, very popular guy. The two of you are marginal figures in this so far, and Herman Cain, whose biggest resume item is overseeing a mediocre pizza empire, is polling near the top. What does that say to you about the nature of the GOP primary voting bloc?
The race is wide open. The winner has not been decided. I mean, every month there's a new flavor. It just shows that, number one, there's anger and anxiety in America. We're in trouble. Number two, there is no leadership in either party that spells out what we must do now and for the next 10 years. And I think the Republican field reflects America. Up and down, no favorite, no certainty, no leadership.
What do you think is most missing from the Republican message, the economic message, or the message about where we do go in the next 10 years? What are you not hearing when you're watching the debates or hearing speeches on the stump?
Corruption and jobs. Those are the two issues that cross our country no matter where I go. Corruption could be everything from a big check, getting ahead of a big idea. It could be that more money was given by lobbyists and PACs 4 years ago to the presidential nominees than 32 states combined. It could be that more time is spent by politicians in raising money than in listening to the people. And on jobs, the issue is trade with China. Now, you can cut through all the other nonsense. You want to grow jobs in America? You take unfair trade to a level playing field, fair trade. It can be done, and no one's talking about it.
But why? If those are the main issues, and I want to talk about this corruption issue, which I think resonates with our audience, and I'm getting a lot of nods here at the table, does that resonate with the conservative audience, with Republican primary voters, when you talk about that? Obviously, you're not. I don't want to, belittle what you're doing, but you're not polling particularly well at the moment. And so I wonder if is there an appetite for this, or is this something that just is not going to catch fire among Republican primary voters? This focus on the mechanisms by which our candidates have to raise money, the influence of money in politics.
Well, let me defend my 148 pounds, if you would let me.
Please.
I now.
That's svelte.
I've been out of politics for. I've been out of politics for 20 years. I'm the only guy running who served as congressman and as governor. and I face corruption in Louisiana, the likes of which you wouldn't believe until you go to Washington, D.C. So I am still not well known. I have not been in a single debate. I don't know what they want. I noticed the last debate changed the rules. They said you had to raise $500,000 in the last 90 days. I raised half of that. I don't take PAC money. I will not allow a super PAC to be formed to help me or hurt me. I fully disclose everything I get. I put a $100 limit. I have gotten more contributions in the last 30 days than I have in the last 6 months. We are slowly building around two ideas. Corruption. Washington, D.C. is corrupt. I'm not talking about individual people. Barack Obama did not invent this system. He's just perfected it. Can you imagine being elected to a 4-year term to lead America, and barely 2 years into your 4-year term, you say, well, my first priority is re-election, and I'm going to raise $1 billion. It is corrupt, and we must change it.
Mary Kay Henry, do you think that's an example of corruption? Do you agree with Buddy this is a corrupt system?
Well, I think that this system is not dealing with the jobs crisis. And I don't know about the way he just described corruption, but what I think we have to figure out is how do we cross all of our disagreements with each other and get America back to work. And that's the thing that I hear. That's what has to happen. You know, people are in pain and suffering. I have a member of our union that stood up with tears streaming down her face just 2 weeks ago saying, my jobs and hours have been cut so dramatically. I am now foraging for fruits and vegetables out of the market that I used to shop at from the garbage can in the back. And that's happening across this country. That's not like a little accident. That's like the way of life for working people.
And I think one of the things you're hearing is that there has been this week, there circulated that great James Sinclair Venn diagram that sort of tried to map the Tea Party's interests onto the interests of Occupy Wall Street. And lo and behold, there's an enormous shared interest. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's corruption. It's that government is owned, and both the Tea Party and there's the Venn diagram. Both the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street at bottom share the same values, which are let's take big money out of government if big money is allowing government to serve only big money's interests.
Well, and you know what, Chris, just to jump in here, I don't think there's any mystery about whether or not what Buddy Roemer is saying about corruption is true or not. I think that it is true, but you know, and it's not because people are trying to do ill. Right? They're coming at it with the best of intentions. The temptation is to say exactly what George W. Bush said famously, when people hurt, government's got to move. Right? Well, what happens when that spirit takes over governance? What happens is you end up being in a situation where you say, we can't let these people fail because there are partners. There are partners in the private sector. We have to keep shoveling money into these enterprises, regardless of whether or not they're being perpetuated in this totally artificial way. That's not going to serve our interests. That's going to deepen the situation that we're in.
Buddy Roemer, I want to keep you through this break, if that's all right. We got Buddy Roemer live from Baton Rouge, a candidate in the Republican primary, former governor of Louisiana, and a congressman from that great state. We will be right back with him and my panel after the break. We are back. We have Buddy Roemer from Baton Rouge. Buddy Roemer, former governor from Louisiana and current candidate in the Republican primary field. We are talking about corruption, money in politics, the jobs crisis, and our inaction about same. Buddy, you just talked about the president. I want to push back a little bit on something you said about the president sort of abandoning 2 years in his responsibility to the country to go raise money. It seems to me that he has been pushing for a jobs package quite hard and quite strenuously for the last several months, trying to get something passed through Congress, particularly so there can be action on the jobs crisis. Why is that? A lot of Republicans say that those speeches he's giving are campaign speeches, but of course he's just supporting a legislative agenda that he's trying to get passed, right?
That's right, and I wasn't trying to gang up on him or single him out. Mm-hmm. He just heads a system that rewards fundraising above all else, above a great idea, above building a nation. I mean, we know what to do to create jobs. The president must know. He needs first to make it a priority. It's not a priority. His own administration has 1.25 million patents pending in his patent office. These people have already paid their fees, and we just can't quite get around to doing the patent work. There's 8-year backlog. There are 3 jobs per patent. What's 1.25 million times 3? It's jobs. Number 2, fair trade with China. Why doesn't the president stand up and defend American working people and tell the Chinese, if you make products with child labor, if women work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, if there are no standards, it will not stand. And we will have a fair trade adjustment to meet minimum American standards. If GE moves a plant to China, and that plant would not be eligible to open in America, my God, we would be angry about it. That's exactly what's happening. And here's what I mean by corruption. The biggest corporate giver to the President of the United States 4 years ago was GE. $4.3 million. They pay no taxes. We have a tax code you can't read. I call that corruption.
Buddy, let me just just give the disclaimer that, of course, GE is one of our parent companies, which folks watching at home should know. This will be the last episode.
I apologize.
And I'm kidding. No, don't apologize. No, I'm just informing people. Full disclosure. But here's what I want to press you on. Look, a lot of what you've just said, I agree with. I think a lot of people at the table agree with labor standards in China. The problem is Republican primary voters don't agree with it. It just seems like you're running with the wrong folks. And when you come out and you say you support Occupy Wall Street, which you did on Twitter, and look, I would love to live in a world in which you were the leading GOP contender, but it just seems like it's a delusional to pretend that the Republican primary base shares anything with the worldview that you are enunciating, I think, quite artfully here on the program and on your campaign.
Chris, we'll find out. I have not been in a single debate. I've not been. Let me say this now. Let me say it, guys. I've not been in a single debate. My poll numbers, I rank 7th in Florida. I was ahead of John Huntsman. I was ahead of Gary Johnson that you talked about.
I think you might be more popular than John Huntsman in the field. I think that is entirely possible.
I start with no big checks.
Right.
I was the only member of Congress that didn't take PAC money. I maintained that for 30 years. I was the only governor in America that didn't. You know why? In Louisiana, I had to fight corruption. You have to say no. You have to be disciplined. It has to be your first priority. I don't think jobs are our president's first priority. But I say that humbly, and I disagree.
Mary Kay, you disagree?
Governor, I just think he's been saying crystal clear to every American that we have to get this done. He's been criticized, actually, for making jobs a priority since Labor Day. So I don't understand the point you're making.
I don't think jobs is John Boehner.
Let me make it another way. Here's what business needs. Look, I'm a business guy. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lifetime politician. I'm a little bit weird here. I grow jobs. I've built $1 billion bank with no help from the government, okay?
You're a banker.
I did it in the last 5.5 years. That's a big plus, no doubt about it. But my Main Street Bank grows jobs. That's what we do. We haven't foreclosed on a single homeowner. We structured our small business debt. Hell, that's why I'm in business, to do that sort of thing. And the reason I point my finger at the president is not just because he's the leader and I expect more from him, is that he hasn't made it a priority. There are no new ideas here. Everything is a temporary patch. Everything is a Band-Aid. Why don't you stand up to unfair trade to China, Mr. President? Is it because your advisor, your jobs advisor, is head of a company that fires American and builds plants overseas? I say made in America ought to be the issue in this campaign. And by God, our last 3 presidents, a Republican and 2 Democrats, have given jobs away by the millions, and I call their hand on it.
Chris, can I just touch on a couple things quickly? One, Buddy Roemer says he doesn't want to single out Barack Obama. I'll single him out because he's singled himself out, right? The reason why we're talking about jobs now is because he spent so much time in the beginning doing what? Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, as it is sometimes known, expressly billed as a way to bend the cost curve. That's gone up in smoke. The class.
It has not gone up in smoke. It has not gone up in smoke. We can talk one small section of it. They had to cancel one small program.
This is like pulling out the piece at the bottom of the Jenga here.
That is very different than going up in smoke. But continue. Medicare costs are actually down for the first time over the last 6 months.
Crumbling into dust. If you remember that. Okay, so I think that's part of the conversation that we haven't had yet. Another part of the conversation is, I appreciate Governor Roemer's voice. I commend him for saying what he's saying. But the idea that this message or the things that he's talking about aren't going to resonate with Republican voters, I think is just a caricature. I mean, you've got Ron Paul offering a budget that would cut $1 trillion. You've got Mitt Romney talking about, sort of flirting with a trade war with China, rattling the saber on that. You've got candidates in that field who are talking about these kinds of things. Crony capitalism used to be something nobody talked about. Now everyone's talking about it. This is something. This is a palette of issues that's alive and well on the right in the Republican field.
I want to talk more about the issue of whether there is productive overlap in these two visions right after this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Up with Chris Hayes. We have Buddy Roemer live from Baton Rouge. Here at my panel, I have James Polis, Mary Kay Henry, Dahlia Lipwick, and Richard Kim. Richard Kim of The Nation magazine, you wanted to respond to something that Buddy said.
I want to push back on this idea that there's this huge overlap between the Tea Party and
that we're going to find common ground between Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street.
And I've reported on both of them sort of on the ground. And I think on a superficial level, you see this sort of frustration at Washington, right? But it's coming from fundamentally different places. When you talk to Occupy Wall Street people, they think that Washington is wholly owned by Wall Street. And they're mad because Washington hasn't done enough, right, to fix the economy. When you talk to Tea Party people, they think Washington has been overrun by special interests. And what they mean by that are unions like SEIU, Acorn, and Van Jones. And what
who's been on the program and told me about what it was like to run the world.
And what they think the problem in Washington is that it's redistributing money away from the top to the bottom, actually. And one of the sort of key polling points around that is that when you poll Tea Party people, they think government does too much for black people. I mean, that is really one of the markers of whether you're in a Tea Party or not, how you respond to that question. So this is just a fundamentally different group of people that you're talking about, which is why I kind of don't think it doesn't matter what these candidates talk about, whether they're going on about crony capitalism. The base here is just fundamentally, it doesn't overlap.
There's irreconcilable clash of worldviews and visions that we shouldn't be looking at this Venn diagram.
I just think it's interesting. I've been thinking this for a little while now, since Senator Blumenthal turned into Richard Kim. But I've been thinking how interesting it is, just psychologically, that the paradox is always going to be that we both hate and mistrust government and also want government to fix everything.
Right.
We hold those two irreconcilable ideas in our head at all times. So I guess I'm just going to...
As an American public, you're saying broadly.
All of us. And that's what we're screaming about. We're like, we hate you, don't do anything, but also fix everything. Right. And that's what the signs say.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's important for us to think really with some discipline about why it is that that's happened and what we can do to actually repair that. And when I look at sort of what's going on at the local level, what's going on at the state level, the way, again, that politics is being just centralized into Washington and into state capitals, where, it's these party versus party fights that take place in the capitals and especially in Washington, D.C., that put the American people in a position of thinking, like, if I'm not a member of one of these teams, if I'm not fighting for one of these teams, then I can't actually do anything to affect the way that my life happens.
Well, but I think that, the sort of two-party system, which we could have a sort of broader, abstract, theoretical conversation about its sort of efficacy and effects on American governance. I mean, I do think that party politics are a way that we channel ideological differences and differences of interest. And in terms of what the interests are of the actual people who are occupying Wall Street, we have a little bit of data. Demos did a study, and they went and talked to people who are part of the Occupy Wall Street movement to see what are you actually concerned about, because there's been all this speculation about it, and because there hasn't been a sort of a specific demand, even though they issued this manifesto. So the title is, what would you like Occupy Wall Street to achieve? And the top answer, 35% said they wanted to influence the Democratic Party the way the Tea Party has influenced the GOP. meaning these are people on the left. I mean, that is not a response you get from conservatives. 11% do want to break the two-party duopoly that we've just been discussing. 9% engage and mobilize progressives. 9% promote a national conversation. 8% are not sure. Buddy Roemer, you've embraced Occupy Wall Street. When you see that 35% of Occupy Wall Street, the most common response of the activists themselves is to influence the Democratic Party the way the Tea Party has influenced the GOP, what is your response to that as a member of the GOP field who has embraced Occupy Wall Street?
Well, it sounds like America. I bet if you were to poll America, you'd find the same sentiment.
Yeah.
I mean, the parties have become fundraising shills for the status quo. Look, I've been in both parties 20 years. I was the only governor to change parties while in office. I got sick of the Democrats. Now I'm in the Republican Party. Can't even get in a debate to talk about jobs.
There's no parties left for you to go
to. Corruption. I mean, it might be me. Now, it might be me. But you know, and I'm a proud Republican, but I'm a prouder American.
I think
it's time that we.
I like that you said it might be you, because sometimes you get people who you know someone who always complains about their roommate. They have a sequence of roommates and they always have terrible roommates. At a certain point you begin to come to the conclusion maybe it's not the roommates. But I cut you off. I'm sorry. Finish what you were saying.
Well, it's a simple point, in that we need to build a nation from the center, not from the right or the left, from the center. And sometime, someplace, somewhere, some leader will have the experience to reach across the party aisles and say, "Join me."
Okay,
not as a party, but as an American.
One of the centrist views that is out there that I think is accounting for Occupy Wall Street's popularity, and it's polling quite well, is the fact that there is broad-based feelings about the banks having done a bad job, having screwed up the economy, and people are very angry that they have been. There has been no accountability for that. I want to play a bit of a great piece of sound, which was this comes from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and this is his 1936 speech about the banks and about what he encountered, the problems he encountered in terms of a political system that had been captured essentially by financial interests, and what he has had to do to break it. Listen to this.
We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace: business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. And we know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
It is just inconceivable. Everyone here is fanning themselves. The chills of FDR's rhetoric there. Richard,
well, you see why President Reagan was a Rooseveltian Democrat. I mean, those words are still true today, guys. Ask Chuck Schumer.
And he
Ask
started
Barney
the
Frank.
unraveling of the things that we all hold dear in this country for the common good. That's the Reagan legacy that we're living with now.
Right, but in terms of this president's relationship to Wall Street, I think there's a sense in which, despite the fact that he passed and worked very hard to pass a Wall Street reform bill, which has certain elements of it that are quite good, and the easy path would have been, I mean, for people that sort of attack Barack Obama for being insufficiently hard on the banks, the fact of the matter is, he could have just not spent the political capital trying to pass that financial bill. I mean, the path of least resistance would have been just to not do that. He did do that.
Given the amount of money he's raising from Wall Street, it doesn't seem like he spent that much political capital.
No, but of course he spent political capital. Look, I mean,
absolutely.
No, listen,
guys. Why do you excuse mediocrity? There was no Wall Street reform. I read the banking bill. Hell, I'm a banker. The 19 biggest banks in the world on Wall Street, all got bailed out.
I for one here, don't excuse Wall Street mediocrity, Governor Romer. I think actually the Democrats and Barack Obama did not do enough to reform Wall Street. And what they should have done back at that moment, and which there was popular will to do, was to restructure the banks, to break them up because they're just simply too big to fail, and to pass a whole bunch of regulations that would have clamped down on the practices that we're seeing revived again today. They could have passed a cram down mortgage legislation that would have kept people in their homes and forced all these banks to take a huge haircut. And that was what there was will for, and that did not happen.
Let me just actually explain what cram down is so folks know. What happens right now is that if you go into bankruptcy and you have one mortgage, right, a single mortgage, that mortgage cannot be touched by the bankruptcy judge. That is sort of inviolable. If you have a second mortgage, so you have an apartment and then you have a summer home, the summer home can be restructured in bankruptcy court, and your yacht, if you have a loan on your yacht, can be restructured in bankruptcy court, but your single family home, if you are declaring bankruptcy, is inviolable in bankruptcy court. And there was legislation that was proposed, which the White House said they supported but did not lend much muscle to, truth be told, that would have changed the law so that mortgages could be restructured in bankruptcy court. And the lobbying of the banks on Capitol Hill was so strong against it, it prompted Dick Durbin, Senator of Illinois, to say, frankly, the banks own the place. That was his conclusion in watching that fight. Mary Kay, do you feel that the banks are sort of the locus of what you as a labor leader find yourself up against?
Well, banks are a piece. I would say corporations and the rich and the Republican leadership, like, it's all part of a system that is holding in place this terrible inequality and an unwillingness to address the emergency. And banks are a part of the problem. 5 million people forced out of their homes. Record profits, CEO bonuses that are off the charts at a time when wages have been stagnant is wrong. But it's a piece of a whole economic system that has to get challenged.
I would put the Democrats in the table there too, and that's sort of the message of Occupy Wall Street. I agree with you that those are primarily the forces responsible, but you also have Democrats who weren't getting up on the stump and pushing back against Wall Street, and that's really the message that the entire system has been broken, and that there's too much lobbying money and Wall Street money circulating through Washington.
And let's talk about Dodd-Frank. Do you think that was a good bill?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was a good enough bill. And when you look at it, you have people from Frank's office who went to go consult at Goldman Sachs, and you have people who worked in Dodd's office. So the revolving door happens across Washington.
Let me take the chair's prerogative to say that I think the Dodd-Frank bill was not good enough, but I don't think it was a bad bill in the sense that I don't think it was. Sure. I don't think it was. I think it was better than nothing. So the alternatives on the table. Buddy Romer,
if you operate for cancer. If you operate for cancer and you fix 2 broken bones and get the arms right and the fingers, but leave the cancer, it's not a good bill, guys. Too big to fail is still the law. Yeah. Glass-Steagall was not reimposed. Capital ratios do not have to go up with mega banks. It was BS. And after it passed, where our president went? He went to Wall Street for a fundraiser hosted by Goldman Sachs at $35,000 a ticket. Y'all make this a great intellectual conversation. Just follow the damn money.
Former Louisiana Governor Buddy Romer, now presidential candidate. Thanks so much for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. I like you, man.
A pregame show for the Sunday morning political talk shows right after this. We were just talking about Occupy Wall Street, and I just want to, before we get to the Sunday pregame shows, I just want to inform folks there are sort of 2 big concrete things that are happening on the horizon. Adbusters, that originally put out the call for Occupy Wall Street, is calling for a global march October 29th to advocate for a 1% financial transaction tax. Financial transaction tax would be a tax on every financial transaction, and it would be targeted, depending on how you construct it, to get people that are doing a lot of speculation, a lot of moving money around, as opposed to people that are buying and holding. It could raise, Dean Baker, who's an economist who's looked at this, could raise somewhere in the order in the U.S. about $50 billion a year at the low end. The other thing that people are doing is this Move Your Money campaign, in which they're moving their money out of too big to fail banks, large banks, into community banks and credit unions. So I wanted to sort of get that into to kind of concretize a little bit of the discussion that we were having. Now, I want to get your questions that you would ask. We have distributed to you a list of the guests on the Sunday shows. Some of the big names on today's Sunday Talkers include Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Vice President Joe Biden, Republican presidential candidates Ron Paul, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, and former Senator Rick Santorum. We got you guys a list of the others, too. James, what would you ask of whom?
Well, I think that with Hillary Clinton and Ron Paul being sort of on the same show at the same time, I just want to pose the question to them both. It was a perfect contrast of answers I would expect. Hillary Clinton's been going around delivering sort of high-profile speech on economic governance and the importance of economic governance to America's foreign policy. My question would be, well, gosh, given the fact that right now Europe's attempt at implementing economic governance as a model for bringing the continent together and sort of replacing politics with something a little bit more economic has resulted in what looks today like the high road to catastrophe, preventing us as Americans, as Barack Obama himself has noted in a press conference, at least one press conference, from governing ourselves the way we would like and from controlling our economy in the way we would like. Isn't it time to be sort of more focused on critiquing the concept of economic governance than it is touting it as the way forward for the 21st century?
James Polis, Mary Kay Henry, President of Service Employees International Union, what would you ask?
I want to ask Michelle Bachmann why everybody can't pay their fair share in this country. And I feel like working people have done more than their part in contributing to the recovery. Our homes, our wages, our jobs have been given to this country, and we need her to lead on making everybody pay their fair share. The rich, the corporations that don't pay a dime in tax need to help invest in people.
Dahlia Lithwick of Slate, what would you ask?
I want to ask Rick Santorum about his newly stated opposition to contraception. I think he's talking about Title X. He describes contraception as, quote, a license to do things in a sexual realm that is counter to how things are supposed to be. And I guess I would just ask him whether doing things in a sexual realm just means sex. And I think I'd also like to ask, how are things supposed to be in a sexual realm? And then I'd just follow up.
Like, here's a pen and paper.
Yeah.
Could you draw for me?
Show me. What are things in a sexual realm that are okay?
The Venn diagram.
Because presumably sex between married adults who want to use contraception is also not how things are supposed to be. And then quite seriously, I would just ask him what he would plan to do as a public health matter with what Guttmacher Institute, a nonpartisan institute, anticipates would be millions and millions of unintended pregnancies as a result of that kind of policy.
Great question for Rick Santorum. Richard Kim of The Nation and TheNation.com. What would you ask of whom?
I would ask Secretary of State Hillary Clinton if she still believes the United Nations and the International Criminal Court have any legitimacy as bodies that will solve conflicts, or is it just drone strikes and NATO airstrikes that we should rely on to implement U.S. foreign policy and global justice?
And you would ask this because of the unprecedented number of drone strikes that the U.S. government is currently engaged in a variety of countries around the world.
As well as the NATO campaign in Libya.
All right. Well, those are the Sunday shows coming up. Coming up, what you should know for the news week ahead. A quick update on a story we first brought you 3 weeks ago. 71-year-old Dixie Mitchell was facing foreclosure this month. Her Seattle home about to be auctioned after her husband fell ill and they could no longer afford the adjustable rate mortgage a bank had called to offer them, refusing to modify the loan. She had nowhere to go. With local help and attention raised to her dilemma, an attorney helped out pro bono, renegotiating her loan to a level she can afford. Dixie Mitchell is keeping her home. That's one family, anyway. I'm going to tell you what you should know for the week ahead, but right now, here's a preview of what's coming up on Weekends with Alex Witt. Alex, what do you have in store for us?
All right. Well, it was a make-or-break night in Iowa, Chris. This happened yesterday for the GOP contenders vying for that all-important social conservative vote, especially when it comes to abortion politics. We're going to bring you all the details and the highlights from the candidates in Iowa. And calendar chaos no more. Nevada makes a big move to settle the primary and caucus calendar. And so, Chris, it means we journalists will not have to do our Christmas shopping in New Hampshire this year. And John Edwards' daughter Kate is all grown up and walking down the aisle. We're going to bring you details of her wedding this weekend. We love that kind of news. Chris, back to you.
Thanks, Alex. So what should you know for the week ahead? Well, as Republicans continue to decry calls for fair taxation as class warfare, you should know they're only doing it because they are scared. Karl Rove's group American Crossroads circulated a memo reporting that their own internal polling showed that 64% of people favor raising taxes on people with incomes above $200,000. You should know that while U.S. troops are leaving Iraq, as many as 5,000 security contractors will remain. You should also know that since these contractors work for the State Department and not the Department of Defense, they have diplomatic immunity under the Status of Forces Agreement. And you should know that is almost certainly going to produce an ugly international incident in the near future. You should know that simplicity in the tax code is a lot easier as a slogan than it is as a policy. Herman Cain was forced to adjust his infamous 999 plan after a spate of independent analyses showed it would raise taxes on millions of poor people. He's now calling it the 909 plan, but you should also know that if he sticks around in the field long enough, it will be the 000 plan by the time he's done. You should know that this week, our long national nightmare is finally over. We now, thank heavens, have a new Commerce Secretary. John Bryson was confirmed on Friday by a bipartisan vote of 74 to 26 and replaces former Secretary Gary Locke, who is now our ambassador to China. You should know that though there weren't many policy objections to Bryson from Republicans, they still delayed his confirmation for 5 months. 5 months. Because they wanted Obama to sign some trade deals. You should also know that there are currently more than 20 judicial nominees awaiting confirmation, and that thus far Obama has seen a shockingly low 68% of judicial nominees confirmed as compared to Bush, who saw 81% confirmed. And you should know, as we continue to wrestle with the legacy of our disastrous invasion of Iraq and the construction of a post-Gaddafi Libya, that with far less attention in the U.S. press, the Syrian people are demonstrating courageously against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. You should know that Syrian security forces killed at least 24 people on Friday alone, and that no matter how many they kill, the desire for a free Syria will not abate. And if, like me, you will be spending much of the next week talking on, reading from your cell phone, you should know that the largest study ever undertaken of a possible link between cell phone use and cancer has some good news. The study, published in the British Medical Journal last week, found that among over 350,000 Danish adults studied, quote, there were no increased risks of tumors of the central nervous system, providing little evidence for a causal association. And finally, you should know that even if it won't cause cancer, checking your Twitter feed during dinner is still rude. I'm mostly telling myself that. When we come back, my guests will tell us what they think we should know for the week ahead, right after this. Our guests are back to tell us what we should know as the news unfolds this week. First, I'll start with you, James Politz of the Daily Caller and of Postmodern Conservative. What should folks know as we head into this week?
They should know, and this is a story the Wall Street Journal has been covering, shadow lending in China is becoming a problem. Beijing is trying very hard now, I think a little bit too late, to get on top of this practice. It's a problem not just because the banks are lending off the books at different rates, and that has an impact on the way mortgages and housing operates in China, but also because increasingly they're repackaging these loans into investment vehicles to try to get out from under Chinese regulations meant to keep inflation under control. The Chinese know that this is going to become a problem. From over here, from my house, I can see that this would be a problem in China as well, one with global repercussions. There, as here, the issue seems to be not so much a problem with capitalism as this new form of finance that we might call debtism.
Debtism. Interesting. Mary Kay Henry, president of Service Employees International Union. What should people know as we go into this week?
We have union members, civil rights activists, and immigration advocates joining hands together in Alabama this week to stand up against this terrible racial profiling that's happening, where students are getting pulled out of classrooms and asked about documents. And that, in my mind, is part of what we talked about today, which is that there's a concerted attack on people to sort of distract us from the real problems in this country and the need to address the 1%, 99%, and get America back to work. So we are joining hands for good jobs now. Everybody has to pay their fair share. No more cuts, and every immigrant needs to be a citizen in this country.
Arizona, of course, has passed the harshest anti-immigration law in the entire country, including a provision that requires documentation for children enrolling in school of their parents, I think it is. But that has scared. We've covered it here on the show. It has produced a situation in which you have kids being kept out of school. The Obama administration administration's Justice Department has sued under federal law, and I think a federal judge has enjoined sections of it, particularly the sections that have to do with schooling, but much of it still remains in place, and it is really causing tremendous. We're hearing news every day out of Alabama about what problems are precipitated by that legislation. Dahlia Lithwick of Slate.com. What should people know?
I wrote about this week, and I think it's interesting and important. I've noticed a real flashpoint in the Occupy Wall Street conversation is Citizens United, the sort of big blockbuster Supreme Court decision that for the first time ever turned corporations into people too. And I think one of the things that people are missing in this story is that Citizens United, while a very symbolic victory for corporations in America, doesn't mean what most of us think we mean. Certainly, I think, in terms of the big picture of corporations owning government, is not really the problem. And I ask people to look at the long picture, at the Roberts Court's entire track record in terms of big business and all the ways that corporations consistently win. I think Citizens United, Chris, is the very tip of the iceberg. And I just really want people to think about how the Roberts Court has made it, forced people into arbitration, has made it impossible to pull together a class for a class action suit, changed pleading rules under Iqbal and Twombly to make it very hard to get into court. In other words, systematically shutting the doors on average Americans and letting corporations prevail. Citizens United is the tip of the iceberg.
Richard Kim of The Nation and TheNation.com. What should people know?
You should know that for the first time since declaring that she's not running for president, Sarah Palin posted on her Facebook page. And what she posted about was Fisker Automotive, which is this car company that got a $500 million loan guarantee from the Obama administration to make cars. And those cars, two of them, prototypes have apparently been made in Finland. But what you should also know is that none of the money from this loan guarantee actually went to making these cars in Finland. And the third thing you should know about this is that the people really driving this story behind the scenes are not people concerned about crony capitalism, which there undoubtedly is some of in Washington across the board, but actually climate change denialists.
Richard Kim of TheNation.com. I want to thank my guests today, James Polis, the Postmodern Conservative Daily Caller, Mary Kay Henry of the Service Employees International Union, Dahlia Lithwick of Slate.com, and Richard Kim of The Nation, TheNation.com. Thanks so much, guys. You were great. And thank you for joining us. If you missed us yesterday, set your DVR now for next Saturday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, when Atlantic Monthly writer Ta-Nehisi Coates will join me. And, of course, we'll also see you back here next Sunday at 8. And in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook at Up With Chris. Up next is Alex Witt, and we'll see you next week here on Up.